Well, I appreciate everybody sharing the things you've shared, and now I'm getting ready to go through some of these pictures, and because I kind of wanted everybody to know what it used to look like. And I mean, Pastor Young, the Cornerstone Church, have refurbished everything wonderfully. I mean, this is just state-of-the-art, first-class, everything that they do is. And it's a lot like, I mean, if you've never been to Singapore, Singapore is clean.
Yes.
Everything is clean, everything is freshly painted, everything is just right, and that's exactly the way they've done this place, and it was in great need. And when they saw it, it was in terrible, terrible shape because it had already started demoing some of it. I mean, they were finding out there was a lot of dry rot and all kind of things in this old estate. As I said yesterday, it was built in 1865. It was a long, long time ago, and it was kept up nicely for years, and then it found itself going down, 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 and Mr. Howells was planning to put money into other things, not just into buildings, because his passion was to get out scriptures, etc., and varieties of other reasons if funds get limited, etc. So anyway, they've done a masterful job with this, but I really wanted you to see what it was when Rees Howells was here, and I was never here when Rees Howells was here, but then the years that followed, you know, with Samuel Howells and that group of people. And I mean, Samuel Howells never thought that he would be in charge of this ministry and be a director as long as his father. And his father wasn't all that long. I mean, just from 1924 until 1950 was all that he was himself involved in this aspect of the ministry. And then Samuel Howells from 1950 to 2002 when he stepped out of being totally the director of this, and then he died in 2004. So anyway, he just had a longer history than he thought he was ever going to have from that standpoint. So anyway, but this picture is in the blue room, and they have it blown up very, very large. But anyway, I had a copy of it. Mine needs to have a little bit of attention, you know, and a little bit of the blemishes that are there. But of course, that's Rees Howells on the left, his wife Elizabeth Hannah, and then Samuel Howells, and they called her Lizzie. And but that's one of it's a great picture of them standing right here in front of the Derwin Fowler estate. Okay, so I'm just going to kind of talk and go to the next one, please. Some of you have been on this road, and if we've been coming up this road from the road up the hillside, but this is the pathway Rees Howells was walking up. And of course, those big walls were there. The wall on the left, on that side was the Glen Derwin estate. But if we turn off the 4-lane road down here below this way and start up the hill, that was the hill he was walking up when he was praying about whether to start where the Bible college was to be. And remember the story when he didn't like where he was, and somebody opened up a place for him to be. But he came down here to the Mumbles and to spend some time, and was on some of those cliffs that you'll see in another day or so. But he was walking up there, and he looked through the iron gate and saw the estate that was there, and God really showed him that was to be. And that's the one he bought with the 2 shillings, you know. And did you tell us? No, somebody else was telling me that story about the 2 shillings. Oh yeah, yesterday I heard this story, and it was Jeff Roberts that told me. He said somebody once was telling Mrs. Howells about the way that how wonderful it was when they saw the estate, how that could be bought with 2 shillings. And she said, well, it wasn't the 2 shillings. It was the 11 months he spent in prayer to pray those things in. Amen. And so, again, it gives it in perspective, because sometimes we think so monetarily rather than just the spiritual dynamic. And it was the spiritual dynamic that birthed it all, that brought it into manifestation. But that's the roadway. And, but that's coming up from the 4-lane road that we were on and making that turn when we come around the curve and coming up the hill. And I've pointed it out to some if I was in a vehicle with you. Next slide. That's myself standing in front. That would be the gate that he looked through. So he was walking up the hill. The picture was down. He was walking up the hill. He saw this, looked in there, saw that estate, and it was there that God gave him the word that this was to be it. And he started this. You've read the story about the faith that it took to get all these things. Next slide. Can we kill those lights right there by you, Sean? Maybe this we could see this better. Okay, now, looking through the gate, we're looking at this end of the house. And of course, it had a front there, but anyway, that was the front. This is the back side. If you were coming up the road looking at that fence, this is the back side of the house. The one down at the end was not there. I'll show you another picture. This was the main estate that was there. And you can see it was huge terrace. It went way down. So there's a big, from the hill here down, was quite high. But that's the Glenderwin estate. And this room right here was the Bryns, Mr. and Mrs. Bryn that lived in it, said it was $1 million room for them. They got to stay in it as they were house parents, oversaw a lot of these things, and they ultimately died. Both of them were right at 100 years of age. And but they lived there. But one of those rooms also became Samuel Howell's room at the age of 13 when he came to live with his parents some. He was in a preparatory school getting ready for Oxford. And but he would come and he would have some of those rooms, and he got to look out. I mean, that look out of that window is just beautiful. Have you been up there in that end of it?
We lived in the corner.
Oh, you lived in the corner. Okay. Well, Wade knows exactly. And one thing that I would say, we heard Wade say some things last evening, and of course he shared some things today. But so anytime that you want to share something, I want you to feel free to do that, because he was a student here, so he has a perspective that I've never had from that. So some of my perspectives won't be his perspective, because he knew the misery of some of the things and some of the hardness. I didn't know any of the hardness that they put on these people. Okay, but that's the Glenderwin estate. Okay. Now, let me go back just a minute. And it was below that, and you may see a picture somewhere. I don't know where I saw it. It may be around here somewhere. But when he opened this and had the 1,000 people that showed up, etc., they were all gathered around there, down there. There's a big picture of it somewhere, of pastors and people that came together to celebrate God's college. It was a whole new thing. Okay, next. Now, the roadway on your right was the roadway I took a picture coming up. This is coming down. So this was the entryway. Now there are those there. If you've been by here, which you have, but I didn't point it out to everybody. They're big homes that are there now, and so all of this estate, which was massive, went all the way from here, the top of that hill, all the way down was all their property, and so but you immediately, as you're going down, it kind of makes a curve there. The drive went right down. And that was the front side of this estate, the Glenderwin estate. And it says Emmanuel Grammar School, because that's ultimately where the school was. They started the school in Sketty, that I'll show you in a moment, for missionaries, and then they moved it down here and opened it up to the community, and the school became very, very strong, very, very popular for many, many decades. But that's when it went down in. But this is the Glenderwin estate. Okay. And that's right.
In that building there,
yeah,
is where the Princess of Ethiopia, she stayed there. And this is where that building is.
Yeah.
She actually left the tub running too long once.
Say that again?
The Princess of Ethiopia.
Yeah.
She came and she stayed in that
Oh, the
building
princess.
there.
Yeah.
And she left the tub running once too long. And it caused the whole ceiling underneath to collapse. But she wasn't used to that. But that was the building that she came to stay in.
Yeah. Interesting fact. That's the view if you saw through the gate. That's what you were seeing one angle, but that's the kind of the front from that standpoint. Kind of a strange front, I always have thought. Okay. If you were looking at the picture you just were seeing, this building's to the right. The back of it was on that entryway as you were coming down that drive. You would come down the side of this building. There was a garage or a garage, as they would say here, and there under that. But this is El Shaddai. So you actually lived in the Glenderwin?
Yeah, I did. We lived in that building.
Yeah, okay, good, yeah. So El Shaddai, this was one of the dormitories that Rees Howells built, and it was very interesting. So that had students. It also, I think, had some classrooms in it. This very upstairs, you see the windows at the very top. It's kind of an attic, and it was open. But Miss Doris Resco shared a story with us the first time that we came, and she said that but they had 60 children living in that upstairs, in that attic, and 60. But during the bombing, and as you can see, if if you were up in there, you can see out over that whole bay. Like we were on the side on the water yesterday looking back. Well, they were right out there at the high point looking out over that all the way back to Swansea. So they could see it. So when Hitler was bombing those things, they had a really, a bird's eye view from that standpoint, and they could see all of that. Well, one night when the bombing was really, really heavy, and there was something like a 14-day blitz once, where just hour after hour after hour, they were just bombing, and they could see all that. And of course, everything had to go dark, etc. But one night when it was so bad, Miss Rusko said, wow, I bet the children, she lived in the Glenderwin estate, she said, I bet the children, we better go check on them. They're probably really, really frightened. And she said, and she took us up there. I mean, we went up there, she took us all the way up, and she opened this door, and she said, when we opened the door, and those 60 children in there, they were all totally sound asleep. And she said the room was filled with a golden glow. It was incredible. I mean, I get goosebumps now. I got goosebumps then. I mean, it was just, she said, we realized that the glory of God was with those children. The only thing, one little girl the next morning got up and said, I did it thunder last night. I thought I heard thunder. But I mean, there was no fear. This was the war years. Everybody was filled with an incredible fear. But Miss Rusko said it was something that was so life-changing to them, was that reality that God was there. He was looking out. Of course, reading the book as you have, you know that God told Rees Howells that no one would die, that these properties, now you realize he owned 4 properties. He owned this property, the Glenderwin property. The first one was Glenderwin, second one, but he had purchased it by the war. He owned this property. They owned Sketty right across this little narrow road. And then they owned the Pentlagar estate. All right, 4 estates. He owned them all. And God said that not one of those estates would have any damage. Nobody would die as long as they were living for the vision. He said, if you're living for the vision, you don't need to worry about dying. If you're not living for the vision, you're going to die. Can't promise you, you're not going to die, Wow, powerful. So he did not,
mask or not.
Pardon?
That's when he gave them the choice of whether they took the gas mask.
Yeah, and he said, if you're really believing, you won't get these gas, you won't have the mask, and you won't go to the shelters, you'll just stand right here. But the children that came from they're called the day students that came with their families, some of them did, they allowed them to do that, but any of the missionaries, kids, etc. like that, and then all of the staff, they had to live by faith or die without faith. Because you're living for the vision. That was his position. And they told us that, and like when we were in the blue room, of course, no air conditioning, which I didn't know we had air conditioning in here until a while ago. And Claire's a magician. She came up with the control. And so we appreciate that. But in the blue room, of course, those windows would be open, and they would be praying, praising, singing, worshiping, and at the edge of the property and on this hillside, which then belonged to this estate, those residences weren't there, the anti-aircraft battlements were set up along there, so the military people could actually hear what they were doing. And but they would praise, they would worship, and all those kind of things. And the only thing, one shell canister was the only thing that came close to any of the properties. So there's nothing of these properties, and all the damage. And they watched, they told me they watched, Hitler just obliterate Swansea. Just brought it to the ground. And then on this side of the bay also, everything was bombed, but none of these properties were ever hit from that standpoint. And there's a famous story that's told from the standpoint of, in this room, actually, they were, Rees Howells was teaching, and the sirens started going off, and the planes, he's heard them, the vibrations and the sound and the drone of these planes coming, and he began to hear the bomb. He just kept teaching. And everybody's sitting there. And there were 24 of these people that were still alive when we came. So we've met some of these people, and we've talked to them, and they said, we were just so shocked. We didn't know what to do. I mean, you're hearing all of this, you're feeling it, the ground shaking, the sounds there. He just keeps talking. He just unmoved. He just keeps releasing this. And so, but then ultimately when the thing went by and everybody's fine, they break out in a song of just adoration and praise. Death has been vanquished. You know, I mean, it just was a tremendous release by God's grace. It's powerful, amen? But he believed, and he knew that was what God said. I talked to some of the nurses also, some of the ladies that were on staff that were the nurses, and they said sometimes when the bombs would come, and of course it happened a lot through that period of time, said that sometimes we would be wringing our hands and walking in circles. You wanted to run, but you didn't want to run. You know, you wanted to go find a hole in the ground, but you didn't want to find a hole in the ground. And they said literally sometimes we were wringing our hands, looking at one another like, are we going to be okay? You know, well, but anyway, they were okay. And it's amazing, amazing story. But that, yeah, the golden glow said the children were fine. And to hear Miss Resco say that, she was a very, very godly woman. And so, and the first time we ever met Miss Resco, we went to her little room there in Glenderwin, and she was talking, or it was after Glenderwin, actually. She had been moved. She had a very large room down in Glenderwin area, and then moved her up on this end after she had retired from being headmistress of the school. And it was a little room. I mean, very, very small, and you know, not much wider than that beam to this beam, and maybe about this long, and had a little small bed in it, and a big wardrobe, and a chair, and a little table. And we sat in there, and she first of all, she served us coffee. She didn't like tea, she liked coffee. So she served Kathy coffee, and Kathy doesn't like coffee. So I was drinking mine, and when I finished drinking my, Kathy had put it up to her lips, but it wouldn't go anywhere. And then so when she was, one time when I had finished mine, Kathy's signaling me, and so Miss Resco looks down and she's talking, and we switch cups really fast, and we think she really saw her do that, but anyway. But we're in this little room with her, and she says, you know, I spent all those years serving down there and being headmistress for the school, and she said, and then when I ended that part of what I was doing, they moved me up here in this little room, and I was rather upset about it. And she was a very short lady. Did you ever talk to her much? She was a very short lady, but very strong lady. I mean, she's Miss Resco, and you're going to do what Miss Resco wants. And she's the headmistress of the school for decades. She was the original one, and all those, you do what Miss Resco wants, okay? And so anyway, she said, I was very upset by this, but she said, she just leaned forward, started whispering. She said, you know what I found in this room? And we're going, no, Miss Resco, what did you find? She said, I found that this is the gate of heaven. And when she said that, the presence of God just came down in that room, man. I mean, it was an incredible thing to realize that at that moment that it was so special. And she said, and God just speaks to me, and the Holy Spirit just comes to this room. And it was an incredible experience to be able to, I mean, it was just awesome. And then she shared many other things from that standpoint. She also shared one that during the war, when God told Rees Howells, and we remember the story, and I won't go through it all, but told Rees Howells that he was to pray that Hitler would turn on Stalin, turn on Russia. Remember that. Nobody expected that. It's written in history books now that the 4 blunders that Hitler made, those are the ones. I mean, it's just, Rees Howells had those things. He prayed on those things. Incredible when you realize that. It added such a dimension of God and His working in the nations to me when I realized that. But anyway, she said when Rees House came down and said, I'm to pray, we're all to join together, that Russia is going to come into the war, that Hitler's going to turn on Russia, because they had a peace pact. Well, when he finished sharing all of that, he looked at Miss Resco, who was always one with him in all those intercessions. He looked at Miss Resco and said, I want you to pray. And when he looked at, she goes, I can't believe that. Well, he went on. Now this is the guy, if he would get up and tell you what he wanted us to pray about, this was the direction, and you got off praying for Aunt Susie or Uncle John. There was a big wooden, you remember the pulpit that was made for him by Bishop. He would rap on that pulpit and rebuke them and tell them to, no, you're not in line. That's not the prayer. He would stop them. I mean, today we kind of try to be gracious with people so we don't hurt their feelings. He just rapped on it and said, no, you're wrong. Okay, so anyway, when Miss Rusko refused, he went on. But at the end of the meeting, he goes, I want to see you. They went into the blue room, and she said, I've never received such a rebuke in all of my life. That I would not continue to follow the Spirit that God was giving and the direction that God was giving, and that agreement was important. And she says, it was life-changing to me. I realized how important what Rees Howells was feeling, which she already knew, but I saw it was so much more important than even I realized. It was a tremendous touch to Kathy and myself to be able to hear those kind of stories and how important the intercessions are and how important to stay on track with what the Spirit of God is doing. But that's Miss Rusko story there, but that's one of the first dormitories, the El Shaddai, that was built. Okay? Next slide. Now, this is the end of El Shaddai, the one we were just looking at. And you see how it went down? And that's on the level basically with the main estate, and it goes down here. Here's another one. I don't really remember at this moment what the name of that one was, but more classrooms that were built. And so that's Dr. Kingsley Priddy standing there with Kathy. And his name was P-R-I-D-D-Y, as you know from the book. Kathy is pretty, but hers is P-R-E-T-T-Y. All right. Okay, so anyway, she was standing there with him. He was showing us around. Next slide. This is another one a little bit lower, because right over here, I think, was the tennis courts. Yeah, and but this one's called Shiloh, all Bible terms. Okay, but other classrooms. Now, we're standing up on the terraces with the main lawn now with the Glenderwin estate. We're looking down. The building over here, Bethel, I think it was called Bethel, the one where Kathy was standing, and this tennis court had been built. And then this was more, you can see this was massive. I mean, this ran all the way, not all the way to the main road and then the ocean, but it ran down there, and then those houses, and of course they had sold part of that estate, Rees House did years ago, for those houses to go in there along the road, because the estate owned all of that. So again, classrooms. Now this little building right here was kind of a prefab building, and when Dr. Priddy was walking us around the area on this trip, he said, he told us a story on that building. He went to Rees Howells and asked him, he said, I really want a laboratory for the school. And he had been put in as headmaster for the school. He was a medical doctor. He's the one over here. Most of you are staying, well, not most of you, but the furthest building away was a hospital that they built, and Dr. Priddy was there as a medical doctor and gave himself, he taught in the college, etc., and gave direction, but he became headmaster of the school. The man that was doing it needed to quit, and Dr. Priddy told me one day, Rees House sent a message to him, he wanted to see him. He said, I was over there talking to him while he was shaving, you know, on that landing some of you saw the other day. He was over there shaving, and he said, I need you to become headmaster of the school. And he goes, well, that really wasn't in my plan. He said, no, that's what I need you to do. So he did for like the next 20, 30 years. He was headmaster of the school. Interesting little, well, I'm going to need to finish this story first. But that little building, he said he went then to Rees Howells one day and said, we really need a library. Rees Howells just looked at him and said, okay, believe it in. Because everything was done by faith. So he said, if you need it and you want it, you believe it in. So he said, I did. And a construction company just came by and said, hey, we're moving this building. We used it for all of our working on this big project, and we want you to have it, and he did. Right behind that building was a big field that they played soccer on, all right? And that soccer field was a nice level area. That became a prime piece of property, etc. in the further selling of Glenderwin many, many decades later. But it was really a useless piece of land. It was unlevel and everything like that. So when the bombing and the war was over, the city had all this rubble because the city had been destroyed. Dr. Pretty took the steps to talk to them, and they brought a lot of that rubble, filled in all of that, turned that into a choice piece of property. You know, it was really, really interesting. So most of Swansea is below that. I don't know what's sitting on top of it now, houses, I guess. Okay, next picture. That's the same picture of there with Kathy and Dr. Pretty. Such a gentleman he was. The couple I told you that died at almost 100, I think Norman was 100. I think he was over 100. And Nolly, that's Norman and Nolly Bryn. And the other two, that's Sam and Kathy Matthews. From some other phase of life, I don't know. So, yeah. But tremendous people. They had been students here. The war, they all went different directions in the war. Then he and Nolly got married. Great intercessors for Israel. They carried on an intercessory group here for decades and decades and decades. But wonderful, wonderful people. That's in front of Glenderwin. That's the Derwin Fire Estate. That's what it looked a little bit. And, oh, I learned a while ago what this is called, and now I've forgotten it. Bastilia or something is what this fencing is called. Bastilia, maybe. I just tried to learn it a while ago from David Hand. But that's what was there that they've taken down, and they're redoing the foundation on that. We just can't see that still as well. I thought those would come out better than this. But it was different color. I mean, I don't know why. There was a lot of some yellow on the woodworking trim, yellow and green, actually. I'm surprised. I don't know why it's like that. And you can see on the top, it had those real large chimneys. It was really sad to see those go. They're not there now. But the mortar started getting very compromised, and the agency, the housing people and the construction people said, in a storm, if those fall, they'll just crush through the roof. That the roof couldn't sustain because they're quite tall, so there was a lot of things on there. And
all the heating in the place would have been coal.
Pardon?
So all the heating would have been it's a coal fire.
Yeah.
There's a coal fire. There's like a boiler outside that you had to feed the coal fire. That was part of the student's responsibility to make sure that the heating was done. And the other one was with wood. You had to pray in the wood for that one. And that was a weekly activity.
Yeah. The praying it in and then cutting it up.
May I share a story on that? Is that okay with Sam?
Yeah.
Sam.
Okay.
Yeah,
Sam,
go
can you share a
Okay,
story?
Pardon?
Can I share a story?
Yeah.
One of the responses we had, every Friday we had fasting and prayer. And in the building, he'll probably have pictures of where on the other side over there, the Sketty part. I remember Mr. Maton. I don't know if any of you met him or had met him. He was the headmaster here when I was here. And during one of the prayer times, he just said, Lord, show these students how much you desire to bless them. And by the amount of wood that you bring in. And it was a prayer that just registered for me, not just the wood, but what it meant. And this is in all honesty, without exaggeration. Within the week, Swansea City Council and the school had gotten together, and they began to bring in lorry trucks, huge semi-trucks full of wood. I had to chop it, I know. huge amounts of wood. And for me, it wasn't the wood that was the issue. It was, Lord, how you desire to bless them.
Right. Wow.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's good. Yeah, that was a dreaded task for most students, wasn't it? Yeah.
7 o'clock in the morning, we would be out and learning how to use a sledgehammer and these the wedges, to have to chop wood, and then to heat the place. I made a mistake once, and I added some coal to the fire, thinking it would just kind of keep it going a bit better. It caused the water to boil in the radiators, and the ladies were not happy with that.
I bet not, yeah.
It was a bit too hot, yeah.
Yeah, and too hot means it was cold. Nothing was warm, was it? Yeah. Yeah. Okay, next slide. That, of course, is the pedestal. I talked a little bit about that first thing last night, but that had when they bought the estate, it had a large statue on it. I have no idea what the statue was. And, but again, Rees Howells had put on there Jehovah Jireh, and faith is substance, became a trophy of God's grace, and to be a testimony and a centerpiece for this whole ministry and what God was wanting. So, yeah. Next slide. See how close those rhododendron bushes were to there? And I told you that had all been cleared out. And I mean, that went all the way back to that, if I remember, all the way back to that greenhouse, didn't it? Yeah, it was just a forest. You see, I mean, wow. So that would be the big tree that's there now. And then there were some other things, but that went all the way around. I mean, just that whole area back toward the Italian gardens, etc. They always used to have flowers around them. There were, Michael Williams was a groundskeeper. He's still around. He was a student and left for a while, but came back and was taking care of the grounds. And then, remember Ivy Impey?
Yes.
Yeah, she got involved. And a lot of the ladies had a hand in certain sections. And, wow, what a place. Okay, and that was Sam and Kathy. You guys recognize this? Yeah, okay. Now, you guys recognize that? On your right is the bakehouse. We're standing at the end of the Derwin Tower. That's the bakehouse. It was a bakery, and that's then what do they call that now?
That was the men's.
No, the bakehouse, but the one at the end, residence, or what is that?
Hall of Residence?
Hall of Residence. I couldn't remember. That's that.
No, the men's.
That was the men's rooms. Those were the men's.
Yeah. This is the bakery, and then that's the next building, right? No?
But we're staying in the Hall of Residence, which is.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
What's this one?
That one was for male students. That's
Yeah, that was male students.
Male
Yeah.
students were there. The bakehouse. When I was there, the bakehouse wasn't used anymore. They didn't bake the bread back in the 90s.
Oh yeah, it wasn't used when I came in '87. But yeah, I just had the wrong name. Yeah. But anyway, so you can see they've made them look a lot different. Those were just gray, if I remember right. Yeah. And this, some of you have walked around at all, this is out toward the Italian gardens. And that Basilia, or whatever that thing is, leads right up to this in a walkway. And I've spent hours walking up and down, praying, worshiping and magnifying God. I explained I guess it was just to Ken the other day, but this moat, you can see it had depth there. It doesn't have depth now. It's been filled in since Pastor Young has come. It never did have water in it, or used to have water in it, but when we came in '87, they had already stopped keeping water in it because of children, what Richard told us. The children were back and forth, some from Sketty, and so they just kind of changed it. But the wall was next to the moat was beginning to crumble and to fall in, so that was needed to be really secured. And they did, and putting the stone in there helped give that a greater stability. Next. Just another view down.
That room straight back, you can see a little house there. That was actually our classroom.
Yeah. Yeah, there were other those buildings are all gone, but that was a classroom, right. All right, next slide. So again, just the lower part of the garden area. Next picture. Now this one. Of course, on the right is Samuel Howells. On the left is Toby Bergen. Many of you have heard me talk about Toby. And then the guy in the center is Daniel Matthews. He's a little shorter than what he is now. But Daniel made his first trip to the Bible college at age 7. And I brought him here, and because one of the things after our first visit, I told Kathy, I said, I wanted my family to meet Samuel Howells, of course, and the rest of everybody. But I told Kathy, I said, I really want our sons to meet Toby. And Daniel was the only one of our 2 sons that had that opportunity. And Toby died just a within a couple of years. I'm not sure exactly of our first trip. But Toby Bergen, some of you will remember this story, and Wade's probably never heard this story. I never told this story here. But when Kathy and I, we'd gone through Scotland doing some other interviews with people that knew Stephen and George Jeffries, and because of a word that God gave me in that same trance, when I saw myself standing and was taken there to this blue room, but so we did some of that research, ended up here at the Bible College, but we spent the night in Cardiff. Take just an hour train ride here, and when we stopped there, the next morning got on the train, and I'm just praying, and of course I'm nervous, I'm excited, and I ask, and I'm just praying, God, my favorite thing is, God, what do I need to hear? What are you saying? What do I need to hear today? And so he said to me, he said, do not judge this place by what you see on the surface. Let me show you the depth of my spirit that is at work within these people. The second thing he said, you're getting ready to meet someone very strange. And I thought, wow, what a word. Now, the very strange was not Samuel Howells, all right? But I didn't know. I just heard those two things. Do not judge this place by what you see on the surface. Let me show you the depth of my spirit that works in these people. And so when we got to the train station, Mr. Howells had told me, he said, there will be somebody there to get you and drive you to the Bible College. He said they'll be holding a sign saying Bible College of Wales. So, and as some of you know, at that time in our lives, we had started the church, and I was on television for 6 years. We had a television broadcast. At that time, we were on 6 different stations in Oklahoma, but I was we were hosting Trinity Broadcasting, Oklahoma City, once a month. So we were on just gone on a satellite network that is broadcasting all across North America. So the television ministry was going very, very well, and that was what I thought that I was going to be developing further. And then one day God said, no, stop doing that and go to the nations, go to the cities. And so that's what we did. And then it opened up the whole. So anyway, when we show up in 1987, we're used to television, Trinity Broadcasting, nice everything, okay? Well, when we walk off down that walkway to the trains, into the train station, we get there, there's a man standing there holding this little piece of cardboard, this gray, brownish, nondescript cardboard. And was written on it with pencil, where somebody had to go over it several times to make it big enough. It says Bible College of Wales. This man is standing there holding this, smiling. It's Toby. He's got a nice smile, But you can see his hair, and then people understand it more. I always say his hair was about this long, all right? And if he had combed it that day, he had run his fingers through it. It was totally disheveled, okay? He had on a sport coat. The sport coat did not match the shirt. The tie did not match the shirt or the sport coat. The slacks did not go with anything. And they were about that short. This is the man that I'm seeing holding this sign, Bible College of Wales. And I'm going, I just met the strange one. Okay. It was something. Okay, so I'm trying, don't judge this place. I'm wanting to judge it. I would have sinned if I had not heard that warning from God. Do not judge this place. I wanted to judge that man as this. Where in the world am I? So we get in the car, and of course the steering wheel is over here, and I'm sitting over here. Kathy's in the back, and we're going, and he's a friendly man making conversation, and I'm talking. I said, well, Toby, how long have you been at the Bible College? And he said, I've been here 50 years. I said, really? He said, yeah, 50 years. I said, what do you do? His knee goes flying up, his hand went up, his knee went flying up, he slapped real hard. He said, I fix the cars. I'm going, oh, good, Toby. That's really good. I'm glad you fixed the cars. It was a piece of junk. The car was horrible, okay? Now, there was another car that I saw later that we will see here. It was a very nice car, but the car he picked us up in was a pile of junk, okay? And I'm going, oh man, where am I, all right? So anyway, so that's Toby. He was just a mess. So we get to the Bible college. He says, Mr. Howells is so excited to meet you. So we get introduced to Samuel Howells. We have a little tea with him, and he says, now tomorrow being Sunday, and I told you the story about all the ministry he asked me to do. He said, you're going to minister tomorrow. He said, Toby will be introducing you, and he will be in charge of the service. I'm going, oh, great. You know. It's okay. So anyway, Sunday morning, we get up. And ultimately, Toby comes to somebody knocks on the door. I go to the door. He's standing there. I'm stunned. I mean, the hair, which looks better there than what I described it, but it looked so much worse that day. His hair was immaculate. He had on a three-piece suit. The pant legs were long enough. You know, had on nicely polished shoes. He looked like a gentleman. He looked like an aristocrat. Well, anyway, so he comes in, he sits down, he goes through the order of service the way we will do. He tells me how long I can speak, etc., like that, and we go through all of that, and then he says, well, let's pray. So we do. We bow our heads, and Toby, he says, I will pray. We bowed our heads, and when he opened his mouth and spoke the first words, the presence of God again just bam, down in that room. I mean, Kathy and I looked up to look at Toby. We looked at one another, and we realized something. This man knows God. Wow. And we were humbled. I've heard that word a lot. We were humbled. We were thrilled. We were embarrassed. We were ashamed. I mean, all of those things. It's like, oh my. God, thank you that you warned me not to judge this place by what I see on the surface. How many times do we do that? And God, do you help us not to do those things? Well, I found out Toby is from an aristocratic family from Ireland. Toby forsook all of his heritage, all of his fortune. His family disowned him because he wanted to follow Jesus Christ. He came here, gave his life as a servant of the Most High. I realized this. Toby had the privilege of driving Rees Howells, Mrs. Howells, for all of their lives. Okay? He got to go on so many magnificent trips and glean from and be in the presence of those men and women of God. I found out that on the death of Rees Howells and Mrs. Howells that he continued to be the driver, all right, for Samuel Howells, that they went on trips together. They did things together. Here's this man. I found out that Toby is the one who translated Rees Howells' Intercessory book into French because he was such a sophisticated and educated man. I found out that Toby was the first to open up their center in the nation of France. He was an incredible servant of God. I found out that Toby was the man that when World War II was happening, that when they would get information, they started getting information that some of the troops on the front lines could not get their medications and that there were people that were dying of asthma, etc., attacks because they couldn't get their medications. Toby stepped into an intercession and said, God, I will not take, he was a very severe asthmatic, had to have medication. He made a commitment that he would not take medication as an intercession for those people, did not through the rest of the war have any problems with asthma, etc., like that, and stood in that position of faith. That's Toby Bergen. See why I wanted my sons to meet Toby?
Yes.
See why I cherish the times that we had with Toby. I mean, it was incredible, all right? Toby Bergen, great man. Very, very muchly touched our lives, as you can tell. Toby Bergen, when he died, Richard Mayton let me know about that. And, well, one thing, Toby Bergen, he drove us out, and while Samuel Howells and I were walking, and he was sharing things with me, Toby took Daniel and they went cockle shell hunting. I don't know anyway. I don't know what they were hunting or what they found, okay? But they had a great time, and so Daniel was able to be touched by that very, very special man. And yeah, now I forgot where I was going next when I took that little thing. So Toby Bergen, when Toby Bergen died, Mr. Mayton let us know, and we called Samuel Howells, and Kathy was in my office, and she was sitting in one chair. I was sitting in another, had it on the speaker. And I said, Mr. Howells, Richard let me know about the passing of Toby, and I know that Toby was very close to you. I know that he was a great intercessor involved in all these years, and I know I'm just giving you our condolences, and I'm sorry for your loss. He said, yes. He said, Toby will be missed. But then he said this, there was that pause of a man of very few words, okay? But this pause came, and he says, yes, he will be very missed, but the vision is the only thing that counts, dear brother. He said it again, the vision is the only thing that counts, dear brother. The anointing of God was so powerful that in the room, it was all we could do to stay in our chairs. I mean, we just became limp. But that was a moment again where there's something was declared by the Most High God through His servant, where He was living. And so what He was living touched us. That place of His abiding, that place of His life, it was there, and it absolutely penetrated our lives. And from that moment, we were even more gripped with the reality that the vision is the only thing that counts, dear brother. Incredible time. So that's that. That
Before
is.
you leave on Toby,
Yeah.
the thing that he said, the word that he said when the presence just fell that day when he came to pray with us before going to the service was Father.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it fell.
Yeah, good, thank you. Yeah. That's great, yeah. Whew. I may not stand up now. Woo! Woo, woo, woo. Yeah. Yeah, but see, the reality, the depth. Don't judge this place by what you see on the surface. And God judged a lot, didn't it, Wade, by things on the surface. And there were times I'd see things, and of course I'd have students come to me and say, Sam, don't you think this ought to be different? And, can you talk to Samuel Howells about this? I'd just look at him and say, I have no authority here. I'm a guest. He said, yeah, but you have all this network around the world. You talk about government. Yeah, but I have no authority here. And I said, if you go to them, and I'd have to give a little teaching from that standpoint and of things. But I was here as a guest. I was here to receive, and I saw something that because God told me. I mean, I would have sinned and judged this place by what I saw in this if my Father had not said something. But because He is loving and because I listened, then He brought us into that position. So good point that I want you to remember on that. Next slide. Doris Rusco. Now, she was a very, very small lady, you can tell, as she's sitting in that chair, but that was
This was her
in a
big room.
kind of a receiving area. Pardon?
This was her big room.
Yeah, this was, yeah. So, Miss Rusco. But that's one story. I'll tell you some other stories. Ultimately, she kept getting a little more frail as she got older. I mean, she was somewhere in her 90s. This lady got so mad when Dr. Pretty died before she did. Now, they worked together as headmaster and headmistress. She was so upset. In fact, some of the ladies told me when I came, said, we were afraid she was going to sin so much that it would be held against her when she got to heaven. She was so upset because Dr. Pretty made it to heaven before she did and got to get his rewards before she did, okay? Yeah. But see, I told you she was a very spunky lady, okay? So she was that way to the end. But anyway, so as she ultimately went from the room, and she was when they moved her here, she was over in that room that you guys are in now, which was the hospital. That's where she had a room, the small room. And but they had to move her downstairs ultimately into kind of the infirmary area. She had this little area that was her area, still kind of a special area for her. But I would go visit her in there, and she would We always had a great time of fellowship. She would tell me what she was believing. These people never stopped believing. They never stopped hearing. They never stopped the intercessions that God had given them. They were always on it, individually and then corporately. And they all had individual things, but they lived for the corporate gathering to come together in this room to pray. And so it was incredible. But she would give, and every time the ladies would say, Sam, Miss Briscoe probably won't be alive when you come back again. But she did. Probably 3 or 4 more times that I made visits, she was still alive. But the last time that I saw her, she was so weak. And I had to put this little chair that was there, I pulled it right up next to the bed, and I had my elbow on my knee and my hand like this because I'm right down there trying to hear her. And I'm very, very close, and she's so weak. And she's talking, she wanted to know things. I was telling her some things. She was telling me what she was believing. And then all of a sudden, this little sick, frail woman reaches up in an instant, grabs me by the lapel of my jacket, yanks me right down in her face, and said, Sam, you have to get people to experience what you've experienced of the Holy Spirit. You have to get them to experience it. They must know Him. I said, yes, Miss Fresco. I mean, that's just what I felt, you know. I mean, it was just, oh my, it was just, but that was that intensity. I mean, here she's dying slowly, okay, just because she was giving out. She wasn't sick. Her body was just giving out. And but that was the passion that was inside of the lady, because that's where she lived. Always the gate of heaven. So, yeah, tremendous lady. Next slide, please. This little lady, gosh, her name is Ruth Williams. The guy standing over there with his hands on his knees is Daniel Matthews. Yeah, he's lurking.
Photobomb.
Yeah, right, before we knew about photobombing, yeah. The lady there is named Ruth Williams. Little tiny lady. Always wore high heels and different wooden floors here than what were at that time. But you would just hear. She had these fast little steps, and you always knew that Miss Williams was coming. Ruth Williams. She became the personal secretary for Samuel Howells many, many decades before. Her aunt was that person for Rees Howells and Mrs. Howells, and when her aunt left, I don't know whether she died or what, I don't remember exactly, probably. And but she took over those positions. She had been a mathematics teacher, actually, and she stepped into that position, and she really ran the Derwent Power Estate. And but very precious lady. And I had the privilege, after I came back after Mr. House had died a couple of times, and with the other group that was handling this, and she had gone to a nursing home. And very, very frail, very, very weak. But I went to the nursing home just to say, Ruth, I just want to come tell you how much I appreciate you, you know. And I can say, you'll never know how much your lives has inspired us. I said, you, the others that have been here for all these years, give yourself for these intercessions. You're just a blessing. And you could barely hear her, but she was still alert. She could still respond. And she just says, you know, thank you very much. I said, you know, we're just going to keep going, because what you're the rock from which we were hewn, and we're going to be faithful. And it was just precious that I got to see her, you know. It's just, but I mean, what a precious lady. Servants beyond anything I've ever seen. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you for your people. Thank you. You can see that fencing I was talking about, but in the center, that's not there anymore. It's been torn down. Those were concrete, kind of like a terrace, kind of like a pergola today, but it was there. At times it had a lot of ivy and roses and things on it, but it's all gone. Okay. On the left is Richard Mayton. He's the man that wrote the books that you guys read. Richard Mayton came in 1957 to the Bible College. He came to a conference, I think it was 1955, heard Leonard Ravenhill, and his life was captured. And he felt to come here Excuse me, I'm getting very emotional. But Richard is probably one of the most loyal people I've ever met anywhere in the world. Loyal to his Jesus, loyal to the mission of Jesus, and loyal to those trying to fulfill it, and gave himself to that. Is that not true, Wade? Very faithful man. Yeah.
One of the things that struck me when I came, I hadn't been a believer long, and I saw people who said that they came as students. They came then to work at the college, and then they retired there. So you're looking at them carrying a vision for 60 years.
Yeah.
In our generations, we don't know what carrying a vision means.
No.
If we do it for a year, we're like,
Yeah,
Or
right.
5 years, and you're like, you're the alumni. These guys, this was they were stripped of everything. Mr. Mason told me once when he went in for surgery, and the Lord told him, look out the window, because this is the last time you'll desire to go anywhere else in the world. And the Lord stripped him of the desire to have that desire to go anywhere else other than to be here at the college. That was just gone, that just disappeared. And but to be brought to that place where all you're living for is to see the every creature vision fulfilled, and your part in it, to see those things come to pass, and to live for a vision that's beyond the end. It's just,
Amen. It's a deep intercession rising up. Richard, next to him there is Christine. I hope we get a chance to meet her. She's the last living person that was a part of this ministry and staff. She came here as a child when her parents came to teach in the grammar school. She lived 60 years in the Glenderwin estate. She just lost Richard, who was her husband of 12 years, just within this year sometime, or I don't remember, but within a year. And but this was their wedding day. And they were in love for all these years working here together. But to be on the staff, you could not be married, was a challenge that Rees Howells gave to the students at the time of the giving of the Every Creature Vision, that God was asking and needing for some to give them their lives to a life of nothing but celibacy and to intercession or celibacy was the second aspect, but being nothing but just for God. And that they would give themselves only for the fulfilling of the Every Creature Vision. Many of those students took it. Those people of the staff, students that stayed, they took that and gave up. I mean, Dr. Pretty was another one that came, and he wanted to be on the staff. But Christine and Richard were in love and laid that down and worked together all these years until just before Mr. Howells died, and they got Samuel Howells' permission. They talked to him about it, and they married, and they were probably some of the happiest people I've ever met. They got married, and it was very, very interesting. I came back after they were married the first time, and I got in the car, and Richard goes, "Sam, it's been 134. And it was just quiet. And I said, "Richard, 134 what?" He said, "We have just celebrated our 134th wedding anniversary." I said, "Oh, yes?" He said, "Yes." He said, "We waited so long to get married, that we celebrate our anniversary every Thursday of every week. And they were so happy, And it went into, I don't know how many we have. One time, then I saw them again, it was 1,400 or something like that. The last 2 times that I saw them, I didn't even ask them, and they didn't bring it up, So, but I guarantee you they were still counting. I bet. Don't anybody ask Christine, though. She's really grieving with his, so don't ask her this, but I won't ask her. But I'd really like to, I bet she knows how many those they celebrated, because it was a weekly celebration of their lives of faithfulness to obey what God asked them to do. They did not regret. They did exactly what they felt God wanted them to do, and it was incredible, And God gave them each other at a time, and she just really, really, of course, lovingly cared for him. And I talked about Richard and his loyalty and the kind of man he was, but he was a very exceptional person. I mean, for him, to read the books, there are 2 books, I think many of you have read it, of the thing about the life of Samuel Howell, because it was one book when he did it, but it was so big the publisher divided it up. But in reading that book, I think, how did this man know all this stuff? When did he journal this? And they all seemed to journal in their lives, they all kept notes, etc., like that. But I mean, he remembers some of the things that at this time, Samuel Howells, but he listened to him for all those years, so he knew there were mannerisms and things. But I thought, God, what a masterful job that Richard Mayton did. And the life of a hidden intercessor, if Richard had not done that, nobody would know any of those things. If people had not published the story of Rees Howells, nobody would have known. See how important that is? So pay attention to what people say. You might be a great blessing to let something not come out of the hidden realm. It affected some millions of people, but yet the person and what he went through and those things you don't see. And but what a treasure. But I hope that Christine, I told her yesterday from the car when we were out looking for the bridge, I told her, I said, Christine, we want you to come up and share. And she says, oh dear. And I said, we're going to give you a few days, because she's been out of her house half a month. She'd been staying here at the Bible college, actually, because they were putting in a shower in her apartment she's living in. She just lived down the Mumbles just a little bit, but precious, precious lady. She just turned, 90, wasn't it? Yeah, she just turned 90. And, okay, next slide. Okay, Ruth Williams, you saw her with Kathy and myself. She's the one on the left. Ivy Impey is the one that's in the center. She used to do a lot with the flowers also. Valerie Sherwood on the right. Valerie Sherwood was a teacher. Also was one that was here as a student during the war years and just became, a faithful servant. Taught in the school for all those many decades until, she was old enough that she wasn't going to do that anymore. And they all lived to be very old. This is just amazing. I mean, God was working in their behalf a lot. But this was put out by faith. That's Matthew and Paul, right? Yeah. And so anyway, I captured that from the internet. Okay. Now that's Catherine, or is that Margaret? I'm confused. I can't remember. There were 2 sisters, Catherine and Margaret. This is, what did I say the other day, Kathy, that I felt? This is Catherine. Yeah, no. Back there, yeah. Where'd we go? Whoa. Oh, there, we're about there, yeah. Well, that went far. Catherine.
Told me Catherine.
And I'm right. That's Catherine. But she was a nurse for all decades. I mean, she was so old. She was taking care of people younger than her in the hospital. Yeah. Go. Thank you very much. That's Norman Grubb. That was the second time we had a chance to hear him in Oklahoma City. First time, going on with that story of yesterday, first time that when I had that trance and got a hold of him, he was getting ready to come to Oklahoma in 2 weeks after I made the call. So I thought, wow. See, God knew. God said, contact Norman Grubb. So I did. And he then is there. This was the second time. But more of that story, when I first contacted Norman Grubb, told him who we were, etc., and we've been touched by the book, and he said, well, I'm going to be in Oklahoma City, and I said, I'd really like to meet with you, and I'd like to ask you some questions. He said, what do you want to talk about? He said, well, I'd like to ask some questions about Rees Howells. He's an old man. He was almost 100 when he died. All of a sudden, he just gruffly, I don't want to talk about Rees Howells. That's all in the past. I want to talk about now. And I thought, oh my gosh. I mean, I was just shocked, all right? And I said, okay, Mr. Grubb, fine. I said, that you don't have to talk about it. Can I still come hear you? Because the meeting was in a home. Because he said, I don't do big meetings anymore because his age. And he said, I just go into homes. And so anyway, he said, oh, yeah, you can come. So we got there. We met him. And beforehand, and we agreed that after the meeting was finished that he would have a little time to visit with us. So good. So after it was over, we went over and sat down by him, and when he did, he just stared at me. And I thought, oh no, I'm getting ready to be rebuked right here, you know. And he just started staring. He didn't say anything, and then he says, just started telling me stories about Rees Howells. Started telling me things and just opened up. And then he looked at the host and hostess, and he says, can Sam and Kathy go out? They were going out to eat after the meeting. He said, can they go with us to the restaurant? He said, I want to visit with them some more. So we said, yes, we can go. And so we did. And so at the end of that conversation, he says, you know, there's another book that can be written out of the journals. And he said, because of the way the Holy Spirit has touched you, you can write that book. And he said, I'm going to write Samuel Howells and tell him. And I said, okay. So he wrote Samuel Howells and told him that he had met us, because I talked to Samuel Howells by phone by that time. He had met us, that God had really touched us like the Holy Spirit had touched his father. And he said, they're prepared to come and live there. That was what he told him. And you can write the book. He said that. So anyway, so I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. And so anyway, that was... Then I went to his home in Pennsylvania once and spent a couple of days with him. And of course, and that old man kept me awake all night typing on an old style typewriter. Bam, 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 bam. Of course, that was the 1980s still. And but he didn't sleep a bit. He just was awake, and he would. And the next morning we got up and he was telling stories, and he was talking about death and spiritual life and realms and all this kind of stuff. And his granddaughter that was taking care of him hollering, he says, Grandpa, you act like an old man that's dying. He goes, I am an old man, and I am dying. Exactly what he did. I went, oh, wow. And he was excited about it, you know. I mean, he wasn't sick. He was alive. He was an old man. He was C.T. Studd's son-in-law and done all that mission stuff and across Africa. And I mean, my goodness, what an interesting man. Norman Grubb was kicked out and pushed out of every movement he ever started, and he has a whole line of them, but he just kept moving on to the next revelation. He kept moving on to the next thing, and is amazing. But anyway, remarkable man. I saw him get in an interesting argument that night with another very outstanding man of God, that night right there. And I had brought that man. Was used in one of the greatest revivals in Argentina in the 1950s. I mean, and brought him there, and powerful miracles. I mean, oh my gosh, he's another story. Powerful, powerful. Well, he would kind of took issue with something Norman was saying, and did it because they were both very strong personalities, and he just blurted something out and wanted to debate with him on that. And well, I see it like this, and this ought to happen, and this ought to, you know. And he says, fine. And Norman, they got in a real argument. Finally, was, well, okay, are you living like that right now? Prove it to me right now. He kind of silenced the guy, you know, because he really wasn't there. So I thought, oh my goodness. So anyway, but he was in a good mood after that and took a picture with us. So we were thankful.
He likes you.
Great servant of God. Brilliant, brilliant man. Okay. Remember the sign that I said in the entryway, thou remainest? That was the plaque. And you see the large woodworking on the wall, and then the piece of furniture that's in front of it. I don't know what you would call that, but I ought to know these terms, but I don't. But anyway, that's what the entryway looked like, was that kind, and Rees House had that plaque put up. And that, of course, is Daniel and Nathan. Next slide. That's the stairway going up. Excuse me. That's what it used to look like. And that's the clock that was in the grandparents' home that struck 5 when Uncle Dick was healed. And quite a thing. We have pictures. Go to the next picture. I don't know. No. Okay, that's good. We have some of our boys standing there. We have one with our Nathan, and most of you are aware of some of our intercession for him. Intercessions in different ways for each boy. Each boy represented a certain aspect of intercession for the kingdom. And we have a picture of Nathan that by that clock, because we're waiting for the clock to strike. And so we have that. In fact, we have a picture of Nathan, that picture right on our bed, because we look at it and we're believing. But anyway, another trophy of God's grace. Amen. That's the blue room that we were in last night. That's what it used to look like from that standpoint. It had those big drapes that was there, the windows and etc. And you could see a little bit, but they were blue. This was a chair that was on that big oak table that was in there. And next slide. That's Dr. Kingsley Pretty and myself. Next picture. That's the only original thing there, is the marble mantle and fireplace front. It was a very, very unusual clock. Looked like something from another age, and it was. But massive, massive material. Some kind of stone of some sort. And I have pictures, like that's Mrs. Howells when she was young, at their wedding age, and on the other wall just inside the door was one of Rees Howells. Next picture. Samuel Howells and myself standing in front of that, still in the blue room. Now you can see a view of the table there. And all of the fireplaces in front of them then had some kind of electric heater. And next picture. That chair, the one on the right, and then there's a couch. They had a lot of stuff in there that they cleaned out some of it after effect. They had a lot of boxes and stuff that we didn't take pictures of that was also there. They kind of used it as storage. Samuel Howells used to come there. Well, Rees Howells came there a lot from upstairs. And this was where they had all of those late night prayer meetings during the war years. Samuel Howells prayed there a lot for several years. But as his health began to change, for various reasons, he stopped coming there. So he didn't use it quite the same. But actually, when I came, he told me, he says, we will open this up. And every time that I came after that, he would say, Sam, the blue room is yours. It's open for you. And so I would spend the mornings in there praying, and very, very special. And he would come down, and we would spend time fellowshipping and sharing together. But this chair was the one that Rees Howells sat in all of those years, and the one he would sit in during those intercessions in the war years, the late night. There was a chair just like it on this side of the mantle that Mrs. Howells would sit in. During the war years, the late night things, they would come in and they would take out all the furniture, and 120 people would get in that room. And that's where they would have the late night. From 7 o'clock until midnight, they would be in there praying. And has a lot of people in that room. Yeah, okay. But they were, it was just a unity. Okay, next slide. There I am praying in that chair. We have several different pictures. I have a picture there once. Mike Whitman, his wife Paula, and their first son Israel. He was just little. We all ended up here at the same time, and I have a picture holding Israel actually sitting in that chair. Mike wanted that. And Israel's turned out to be a good servant of God. All of Mike's children, Mike Whitman's children have. Now that roll top behind me, and this is another couple here, Darren and Angela, behind that is that roll top desk. That was one that Rees Howells would also use. But all of this was taken away and sold before Pastor Young got the property. And the woodworking and all that stuff that was here had been taken out. And so, because they were going to destroy the building and sell the property, and so kind of sad. Because the clock's gone, everything's gone. Nobody knows where. Where now? Go to the next slide.
Is that Gaius back there?
Yeah, this is Gaius Lawrence. That's Gaius. That's Daniel, Nathan, and Angela, and Darren. They were a part of one of the churches that we were a part of. All right. Of course, there's a wonderful picture for us with Samuel Howells. And what a fulfillment of so many things. Yeah. Next slide, please. That's when I got Rees Howells' hat. Look kind of happy, don't I? Look at Mr. Howells. That's Braden Alverson behind Samuel Howells. Yeah, that's Braden. That's Richard Mayton on the right. And I can't remember that lady's name right there. And where are you, Kathy? Right there. Is that the top of your head, maybe? I don't remember. She may have been taking the picture. I don't know.
Which room was this taken?
Now this room is the room across from the blue room they call the literature room. It was they called it the drawing room. This is the room they would receive guests in, would have tea, any kind of gathering would be in that room. And yeah. Next. I still look about that ridiculous in the hat. But I think I do better now putting it on my head. See, Daniel thinks I look a little ridiculous too. And Braden and they're all laughing. Yeah. Now that I look at it, they're all making fun of me. Now I feel insecure. Yeah, great moment to say the least. Okay. When I got presented with that hat of Rees Howells. In fact, it has, because hats were so important in those days, as you've read in the book, and culture, and it even has, in the inside, it's got some kind of metal piece with R.H., Rees Howells. They put the initials in the hat. So anyway, very special treasure.
Now, did you say that you...
Somebody said something, but I didn't hear
Did you
it.
inherit the hat, or were you just...
No, they presented me the hat that day. Richard,
So you didn't
it
like
was
take it off his head or
it was
something?
Richard's hat.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it was Richard's hat. See, that's again gives you an idea who Richard is. I wouldn't want to give the hat away so much, you know. I'm sure Richard probably didn't want to give the hat away, you know, but he heard to give the hat away, and he did. It's a treasured gift, you know. And yeah.
That's
So it was.
the lady in the blue in the back there. She's the one that was the women's matron here at the college.
Yeah, Margaret.
Pearl.
Oh, Pearl. Yeah, Pearl. Yeah.
Wow.
Pearl's mother, Margaret, was also here. Yeah.
Yeah.
They came later. They were younger. Okay, next slide. That's one of my favorites. Very, very special. Mr. Howells, probably the most gracious man that I've ever met. He's probably the most selfless man that I've ever met. Probably the man more given to the vision. There was nothing about it to be seen, but there was only the faithfulness of who he was before God. I mean, it was nothing about him. Now, he was a very shy person, as you've heard and read in the books. But his uncle and aunt, they became his parents, and his family went to, Mr. Howells and Miss Howells went to Africa. You know, they set him up, and the Howells set him up to go to preparatory school to prepare him for Oxford, which he went to Oxford and received the MPhil degree. And he was a very educated, very brilliant man, and who had a great stammering problem. In fact, some of the people told me that sometimes Rees Howells in a meeting, if Samuel Howells was speaking, would have to leave because the pain to try to listen was so intense. But when Rees Howells died, And a month before he died, he told Samuel that he was getting ready to go be with the Lord, and that he was to fulfill the same things God had asked, at the same way that he had run the ministry, that he was to fulfill that and not let those go, no matter what. Do not let the intercessions go. Everything else can go, the properties can go, everything else can go, but not the intercessions. You stay faithful to those standards that God had given to him. And so Samuel Howells agreed. He didn't know how in the world he could do it, because it wasn't really his, not the same kind of personality at all, because Rees House was very forceful, very outgoing, very, energetic on everything, and Samuel Howells was not. And but when his father died, Samuel Howells called a meeting of people together, and from that moment he didn't stammer and stutter anymore. And because he was just absolutely, and that became a real sign to all these people who so respected Rees Howells and so walked, everybody thought the Holy Spirit indwelt in Rees Howells, because they saw all these things that had happened. And so of course, that's the whole message of that the Spirit gave him, is to have that kind of indwelling possession of the Holy Spirit. And so for somebody to die, which nobody thought he was going to, he didn't think he was going to die necessarily at 70, but he did, and because he was ready to take this message of the Holy Spirit to the world. That's what he was going to do. And but he didn't do, but he did in the book. It's such a powerful book. It just, anybody that reads it, you either read it and touched by it in a positive way, or you start reading it and you don't finish it because you're touched in a negative way. Either it pulls you into more of God, or it pushes you away. Say, I don't want that. I'll tell you an interesting story. My dad, a great lover of Jesus, great man, very obedient, prayed for revival all of his life, led so many people to Jesus. I mean, he was just a personal witness. And after Kathy was healed, we went through all of that, and we had the book, and so we'd talk about it some. So I gave my dad a copy of the book. He said, Dad, I want you to have this book. And he goes, okay, thank you, I appreciate it. And so the next time my folks came to visit with me, my dad had the book. And he said, here's your book. And I go, Dad, that's not my book. I bought that book for you because it was so influential in our lives. I wanted you to have the book. He said, no, I want you to have the book. He said, I can't live like that. I could never live like that. But you could. And he said, you know what, son? He said, you've just always been a little strange. I'm standing on my front porch in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I look at him and I said, what? He said, yeah, you've always been a little strange and a little different. He said, I know you can live like that because I've watched you do it, but I could never live like that. I said, yeah, you could. He said, no, I couldn't. And the last months of my dad's life, and he lived right. His prayer was, I want to live until I want to be alive. No, I've forgotten. I don't remember. But anyway, I can't remember. But anyway, going on from that. But Dad reflected on a lot of things we all did. It was a very wonderful time. But anyway, I won't go through all that story. But Dad said, God's always kind of like this. He says, kind of like God's always had his thumb on me, and he has to kind of give me a push. It's never been, my dad was never, he didn't like to take a risk. Everything, I'm a risk taker. I mean, I kind of, just let me spread my wings and I'll wait for the wind. Where are you going to go? I don't care. I just want to fly. That's just it. I don't care. Just let me feel the wind and I'll go with it. So Dad said, he's kind of pushed me all my life, and he did. And I respect that very, very much from that standpoint. But anyway, yeah, Samuel Howells, yes.
I read in one of the books that Samuel Howells said that there were many that thought that he wasn't able or qualified to take over the reins of the college.
Right.
And he said, sometimes we have to fail in the world's view or in view of others to be a success in the eyes of God.
Right. That's true. Yeah, that's true. So, he was a very faithful man. I've said he's probably the most selfless person I've ever seen. He just absolutely, you just knew the presence of God, and it was always a very intimidating thing because he would always ask you to pray. When you were visiting with him, he'd ask you to pray, and you always knew he was judging you. You know, he was wanting to hear what, because you know, this is a guy that looked at me and said, Sam, I will be in the Sunday morning service the first time we were here, but I will not be back for any of the other services because I don't want to be distracted by people. He looked at me and said, people are very distracting. Do you know? I said, yeah, I've known that. He said, because they don't pay attention and they affect me. They're not paying attention. They ought to be paying attention, you know, and stuff like that. And so he said, I want to listen. So they called it a relay. They had a speaker there that would broadcast in several places on the property, but he had it in his room. And he said, I will listen. I want to just hear the Holy Spirit. I don't want to be bothered. So that's a guy, you know, that when he asks you to pray, he's wanting you to, yeah. One story that I didn't finish that I started, you know, the 2 times a year from 82 to 87 that I called Samuel Howells, and finally he agreed, and I went. Well, we went through all that ministry, took us to the various sites, and one of the things, then he wanted to have tea with us before we left. And so at the end of the week, we come to the drawing room and we have this tea, and he begins to say, and you know, he confirmed things to us, and this is one of the things everything we had been hearing, he confirmed. And he said this, he said, many people have read the book and been blessed by the book. He said, many people have come to visit. But he said, you and Kathy are the first fruits of something I've been believing for. I see in you, you're a first fruit of something. Now I know that all the rest of the visions are going to be fulfilled. Not that he didn't know, but you hear what he's saying. It became that confirmation. He said, now I know. So, I mean, he confirmed so many things. So while I'm sitting there and hearing this man give us these insights, I hear God say to me, Sam, there are some people that are more spiritual than you are. Now, I know that. But yet now my Father is telling me there's some people that are more spiritual than you. And this is what I heard God say to me. This is why Samuel Howells talking to us. Then God says this. He says, you know, if you would have come in 1982, Samuel Howells could not say the things, could have not said the things that he can now say. Because you're a different person in 1987 than you were in 1982. Now, in 1982, I'm at my height of relationship with God. I'm at my height in my spiritual position with Him. I'm at every kind of height that I could possibly think about. I'm there. The greatest experiences I'd ever had, I've had them, okay? But I had even more from 82 to 87. We hadn't started the church. The understanding of fivefold ministry and God's government wasn't inside of me. The understanding of all of the intercessions for the nations, the walking through those things, it just wasn't inside of me. I'd not been to the nations. Since then, I'd been to France. We'd been to France, etc., like that. Things had opened up. The apostolic had begun to unfold those things that were there. So, again, I realized, yes, God, there are some people that are just more spiritual. He knew it wasn't time. So if he would say what he would say, he doesn't have to know why it's not time. It's just not time. And that's what he would say. He was faithful to hear. But then there was, no, it's time, dear brother. And then he was able to say those things and with such a confirmation. And thus, he wouldn't have felt the same toward me and the relationship developed because I wasn't there. It couldn't happen. Okay? I'll tell you another interesting story because of wanting to see that relationship further develop. One day I'm praying, and I hear God say to me, you will be at the Bible college by a certain date. And this was before I started coming absolutely on a regular kind of basis. And God said, you will be at the Bible college by a certain date. And I thought, cool. So I call Samuel Howells and I say, Mr. Howells, I believe that I'm supposed to be at the Bible college on a certain date. And I give him the date. And he says, well, let me look. And he looks at it and he goes, oh no, dear brother. That's a bad time because the session is over. The students are gone. And I want you to speak to the students. I said, Mr. Howells, I don't want to come to speak to the students. I just heard I'm supposed to be at the Bible college on that date. There's something that God wants. He goes, oh no, dear brother, I don't want you to come. So I could have sinned again, like, I just heard God say to me. All right? But I'm being trained. I'm being changed. Okay? Here's this man that's saying, no, it's not time. I said, okay, Mr. Howells, thank you. All right? Now, I don't have a schedule of the 3 terms. I have no idea what the 3 terms are. So, but I don't go. So that date comes. That date passes. I hear God again one day say to me, you are to be at the Bible college by a certain date. So I call Samuel Howells and I tell him, he says, "Oh no, dear brother, that's a bad time." He said, "That's the end of term. Students will not be here. I want you to speak to the students." I said, "Mr. Howells, I don't want to speak to the students. I just want to come. I'm supposed to be at the Bible college." He says, "Oh no, do not come." I said, "Okay." Now I'm going, "God, why do you tell me to call Samuel Howells with the 2 dates that won't work?" That's my question, okay? But, okay, there I am. I don't grumble, I don't complain, and I'm seeking not to sin, okay? All right. So, a couple of months go by again. I hear again a date. I call Samuel Howells. He says, "Oh no, dear brother, that's the end of term. The students won't be here." And I said, "Mr. Howells." Okay, now I left out part of the story. Oh no, I'm on right. I said, "But I want to come." He paused again and he said, it was the end of term. He paused and he said, "You want to come?" I said, "Yes, sir, I want to come." He said, "Then come." I said, "Thank you." And I came. I put down the phone and I said, "God, what do I need to know out of all this?" And this is what he said. He said, "Mr. Howells, for God to do through you with him, he needs to know that he can trust you." And then God said, because Mr. Howells has been very misunderstood, very criticized, and people have really worked against him, right? He needs to know he can trust you. He found that out. I came then on that date, arrived here. It's the only time I've heard Samuel Howells minister because I wasn't ministering. So he ministered on a Tuesday night. Well, when I arrived, we had a meal together, which we always did in the room that is now whatever room, I don't know what room. We ate in there again. Anyway, where there's a table. We've not been in that room, but anyway. So we had a meal together, and at the conclusion of that meal, he pushed the chair back, folded his arms, and looked at me for just a brief moment, and then started telling stories. Well, I don't know. They're just his stories that he's telling. It's the first time I've heard them, and it was about when his father was in the intercessions, and when his father died, and things he and his mother were believing, and things they were accepting, and all as what God was up to. And so anyway, very involved stories. And they, so one thing that happened was he just started telling me these stories. Well, then on that Tuesday night in the service, I hear those stories again. Well, I don't think anything differently. He told them, he tells stories. How many times have I told these stories, you know? So I'm thinking, I heard the story. He's telling the stories again. I'm listening to him. When I visit with some people, walk out of this room, go out through that kitchen door, and Dr. Pretty is just standing out there staring up into the sky. And I walk out there and I say, "Dr. Pretty, are you okay?" And he slowly just turns his head and looks at me, points his finger and said, "It's you. It's you." He said, "You bring things out in Samuel Howells that nobody else brings out." He says, "Do you know I've never heard those stories?" I said, "No, sir. I'm being overcome with goosebumps, just rushes of anointing, this and this." I said, "No, I didn't know that." He said, "It's you." And that's why Richard included me in the book, because he heard Samuel Howells, the things he would say. But there was great strength. There was a first fruits that Kathy and I showed him, that he knew certain things were going to be manifest. So anyway, it was an incredible time. And so I walked with Dr. Pretty. I said, "Can I walk you back to," he was living at Sketty, and well, actually, he walked me. I said, he walked me over. I was staying, the only time I ever stayed in the hospital building. And so as we went over there, we were talking, and I said, "Dr. Pretty, the intercessions that you guys have been involved in all these years, to see the change in the world from when you guys started to what it is now, I can't imagine how you feel." He said, "Yes, it's really amazing." And he reflected on that a little bit of just, because they started out, 1930s, or Christian life before that, but the 1930s, hearing and believing for the every creature fulfillment. So it was tremendous. One little interesting note, Dr. Kingsley Priddy accepted that every creature vision when it was given in 1935 on New Year's Day. Rees House received it on Boxing Day, the day after Christmas, that year of 1934. And then on 1935, Rees House brought it right in this room to the congregation of people that was there as far as students and staff. And so Dr. Priddy accepted it, as many of those people did on that day. Dr. Priddy died 60 years to the day of giving himself to the every creature vision. He died on the 60th anniversary. Isn't that something? That God would so honor him in that way. I mean, the very giving of his whole life. Dr. Priddy was headmaster, as I was a medical doctor, but then became headmaster of the school. He retired from that in 1980. We came in 1987. And he kind of shared a lot of his life and some of his story with us. And one of the incredible things, he said, people have often asked me, did I miss the school after all those years? He said, no. I said, I didn't miss anything, because he said, my life didn't change. His life was intercession.
Wow.
So he said, I was living in the intercessions. I was just living. That happened to be some of the tasks that I had to do, but that wasn't my identity. That wasn't who I was. That was one of my tasks, but I lived for the intercessions. Dr. Priddy is a man who laid down his mission call. He was going to go start a hospital in a Nigerian tribe of people that was a totally unreached tribe. This was in the 1930s. Africa was even more whatever it was then than now. I mean, it was the beginning of everything in some of those nations. And God asked him, lay that down, don't go, lay that calling down, because he said, if you do, I'll give you souls in every nation. And he did. You probably been in his room, weren't you? All those pictures, wasn't it? Everywhere pictures. And Dr. Priddy, as he said, I have souls in every nation. Yeah. It's phenomenal. But that's what God said. And he gave himself. And he was totally, totally satisfied in those things. Dr. Priddy, of course, I told a lot of Rees Howells stories from Sam Matthews' view, right? I see in the way that God showed me things, and this was happening, and this is what was happening to Rees when this was happening. And Wade saw some of those, and Mike and Terry tell me, he said, you used to scare us, because, I was some kind of fiery. It was just so intense and so focused, and you just didn't mess with what God was saying. But anyway, he, one night after one of those impassioned things about the kingdom and what was going to happen, I had this little knock on my door, and Dr. Priddy was just across the landing there at Sketty, where his room is, and I was in that big room that night across. And he said, I'd really like to talk with you. Would you come to my room? And I thought, okay, because he looked kind of serious, And sure enough, I got over there and sat down, and he said, I just want to talk to you a little bit. He said, you're so strong on all this stuff. And he said, I want you to realize something. He said, some people get the wrong view, like you're worshiping Rees Howells or you want to be like Rees Howells. He said, I don't think you really do. But he said, I want you to know Rees Howells was really a human being. I said, I know that. He said, well, I think you do, but I just want to caution you that you be sure that you always keep everything in the right position. I said, well, I really want to. So he told me a few stories about the humanity, not criticism, not in any way derogatory, not in any way whatsoever, okay, but just, okay. And he made a statement. He said, we read all these stories about the things that went so well, and then there's some of the things that didn't go so well. But you read all those victory stories. He said there's a lot of places where he just had some defeats, where things didn't. But Rees Howells never saw anything as a defeat. I wish I could get there, okay. He only saw it as a stepping stone. There's a lot of truth in that. I wish I could really, really get there. He only saw everything. If this didn't make it, he said it was like you remember the story, like a mountain climber. You're climbing a mountain and you think you're at the peak, but you get there and no, there's another one. You have to go on, and that's the thing that he was bringing out. But one interesting thing that he said, Rees Howells' reach sometimes was further than his grasp. If you understand what I just said. In other words, he was reaching always, but sometimes he couldn't quite grasp it. So So those things are there, and I've experienced that in my own life. Interesting thing. This is why I asked the question yesterday to you, Claire. Because the Sketty estate that is, which direction are we, that is right across, that is now gone, and those homes that are there, the name of that is Howells Reach. So I'm fascinated by that term, and I've asked several people now, why that is that a common thing for housing? No. Why is it there? Howells Reach. So it's very interesting. I'd like to know exactly how it got its name, because he reached over there. In fact, Major Pratt, when he heard that Rees Howells was looking over his fence, you remember, looking over his wall, he thought, I better sell this to this guy, or something's going to happen to me, because he's reaching for it, and he grasped it, okay? And but I thought it was in Howells Reach, and so, wow. So I find that very curious, so, yeah. That Dr. Pretty, very, very special man. And yeah, one night he wanted to really talk to me about the kingdom too. He wanted to say, are you kingdom now? I said, I'm not really kingdom now, although I think the king, his kingdom now was defined. And he said, so anyway, he wanted to be sure my theology was right. Great man, had great fellowship with him. He'd take me to his room on a lot of occasions to talk to me. So that was very honored to be able to have those times with him.
Wake up at...
Pardon?
We stayed underneath, there was something called the Ark underneath.
Yeah,
there,
yeah.
And stayed there for a bit. Sometimes you'd wake up 3 o'clock in the morning and you'd hear him shouting in prayer upstairs, praying in tongues and stuff, and you'd just be like,
Yeah.
when as a young man, you're just like, it was just,
Yeah.
very,
Yeah, thank you.
God entrusted not only that Samuel Hawes entrusted you with those stories. God trusted you with those stories.
Yeah. It's marvelous, one of the greatest blessings of my life. Yeah, what you're talking about, hearing Dr. Pretty like that, you reminded me of a story. Samuel Howells said that during that drawing room right there that we're in, that's the literature room now, he said that during the war year with all those heavy intercessions, he would go to the drawing room, Samuel would, and sit down, and his father's room was upstairs above, and he would hear all the groanings and all the prayers and the agony that he was going through. And he said it was just like, he didn't know how one person could bear this. He would go to his father and said, why do you have to bear all of this? Can't anybody else take this, Of course, they were all interceding, they were all believing, but there was just that identification that he had stepped into, that absolute possession. We read it on the wall. You have to understand, God's servant was possessed, or God's servant possessed by God, and he was, and and he paid a great price, but he was willing to do it, because all he was saying when he was dying was glorious victory, glorious victory. And praying for Norman Grubb was one of the ones that he would be praying for in those last days and hours of his life. So, next. That's a picture of Samuel Howell's room. Some of you have been in. The bathroom is there now, but you can see where the bed was, straight as you come in the door. Interesting, too. I just noticed something. That door opens from a different direction now. Very interesting. But anyway, that table-looking thing is a shelf right to the left that had all of his shoes on it, except the ones that were on the floor. But anyway, that was the table that I told you about that he set out, and that's in the picture. You can see it better, but this was taken by my iPhone out of a book because I didn't have this. But I never took a picture of inside his room, and but gives you all the correspondence that he would do, the chair here, and the fireplace there. Kathy and I are very honored to be able to stay in that room where all those intercessions went up for all those years. And there came a point where we came in there for another visit, and son Daniel and his wife Yasha's wedding picture was on the mantle, so that was a real blessing for us. So, but anyway, that was his room. That was, now over here where you can't see was just a bunch of closed bookshelves, glass-fronted bookshelves. Was full of books. But he was a great student of the Word. If you read Richard's book, he talks about the Bible And when Samuel Howells got very ill at the end and wasn't able to do as much, he had his Bible, he said, in the presence of the Holy Spirit. Next picture. That's a picture of this room.
Yeah.
The chairs are turned this way, see?
Guys in blue shirts.
Yeah.
Oh, leaning forward?
What did you
Yes,
say?
That's me. I'm
Are you in there?
Yeah.
I'm in the blue shirt
The
there.
front and the shirt,
Yeah,
the
it was a
leaning,
lot thinner.
leaning forward.
I'm missing. Where do you?
Black shirt.
Oh, yeah. That is, yeah. See, he really was a student.
Jack Paulson, isn't there?
Yeah, that's Paul Smith. Paul was on that. Sandy Alverson, Bob. Yeah, here's your dad. You see your dad? This is Evan's dad, Bob. His mother, Ramona. Bob's now going to be with the Lord. What?
Oh, Sandy.
Yeah.
I see Jamie's head a little bit.
Where's Jamie?
Primrose.
Behind Ramona.
Behind Ramona in the white shirt.
Well, here's Pearl that Wade pointed out a moment ago. That's Pearl. That's her mother, Margaret. Margaret loved, I gave Margaret once Jif peanut butter. She loved it. So I would bring her Jif peanut butter when I would come. This lady, Primrose, deaf as a post, wasn't she? And she would answer the phone. Oh, yeah. Yeah, but that's when we brought the group. This is Gaius Lawrence again. This is a pastor, friend of ours, Paul Smith.
See Bonnie there?
And
Behind Sandy.
yeah, is that amazing?
Behind Sandy.
And this-
In the corner, that's Bonnie.
And Gaius had been touched by God before we brought this group. But then Gaius ended up marrying one of the young ladies that was there, actually. So she was one of the first graduating class, and he ended up marrying her. Wow. Yeah, that's you, Wade. How cool. I had another one of Wade I told him about. He was with our boys. Now, I didn't point it out a while ago when the picture of myself standing up there by the pulpit.
Christy Helson.
Woodward.
Who do you see?
Back here.
Bonnie, Christy.
Oh, yeah, Bonnie.
Christy.
Jamie and Andy Rudd.
Yeah, Jamie Rudd's
Oh, there's Mike Whitman.
right behind Mama.
And that's, Christy, isn't it? Yeah. And Chris, two of those girls ended up marrying two of the students. Terry Perry Christie, she was there, and Gaius married JC.
That's probably Andy's head with hair. Don't tell him I said that. I know, that's probably Andy's head of hair right there. Text me. I need to text that too.
That's the blue door. And this room went all the way across.
Yeah, Elaine can see him better than that.
This room.
Now,
So that would be facing, where the map is, that would be against that wall over there. That
yeah,
was where the blue door would be.
that's just what I was getting ready to say, yeah.
Yeah.
So this room, it would get packed out on those Tuesdays and Thursdays, wouldn't it? So many people came. They had a lot of people that would come in.
That was where we used to preach from. That's where.
Next slide. Oh, no. We hadn't seen it yet.
Is that in here also?
Okay, this, pardon?
Is that in here also?
Yeah, this is in here. And it was right there. And it's like Wade was just saying, this goes on quite a ways. There was just a little bitty stairway, so steep, went upstairs, and a lot of the ladies had their residence up there. But this map was a hand-drawn and hand-colored map by a friend or a previous student of yours. I can't remember exactly how. But it was done with Israel right in the center. And the rest of the nation's because Israel being the center, God's first harvest. But that's what it was. When things started disappearing, I asked Richard, I said, where's the map? He said, I don't know where it is. I would have loved to have had those. would have loved to have had those. All right, next one, please. That's Sketty on the backside of Derwent-Fowler, the estate that's right across the little road. That would be it. And that's the first places we stayed. In fact, the top room on the right was a large guest room. And that's the one we first were staying in. Actually, it wasn't the first one. The first one was across the way right by Dr. Pretty's in the first one. But that's the one they started putting us in later. Yeah. Somewhere. But anyway, that was that estate. And did you ever live in that one, Wade?
That
Yeah.
was where the ark was. This is the front part of that.
Yeah.
It did not-
Yeah.
Dr. Pretty, that's where his room would have been on top.
Yeah. Yeah, so where that room was, and this was kind of a landing you walked by. That was a bathroom. What a bathroom. And then Dr. Pretty's was at the other side of this landing on the other side of the house. Next. This is the fourth estate, the Pitlagar estate. We ought to have Claire say that word. How do you say that name? What
is that?
Pitlagar, the name of that estate. Oh, it's also an area, Penell. Yeah, did you hear that?
No. Say that again.
Yeah, she does it right.
The double L's are up.
I know, they're weird. Yeah. But that's the fourth estate, the one he bought when he was going to sell everything here and move everything there. It's the one that then he didn't get to fulfill those things because Hitler started doing what he started doing in Europe. So they didn't, he owned it, bought it again, one of those things by faith. I mean, with no money, he never asked for anything. He just kept believing God. And a massive estate, as you can see. And it was like 300 acres of property. And it had lots of timber. So what he was wanting to do first, then he was wanting to see Jewish orphans, refugees to be able to come there, children to be able to stay. So he offered it for some of that. That didn't totally materialize. But what did materialize, all right, and the buying of this estate, getting one of those stepping stones, when the war broke out, all the young men had to go into the military unless there was some other service they could give to help the war effort. So Rees Howells approached the government to keep the young men and the students here and staff, to keep them here interceding. He went to the authorities and said, look, I have these trees. Can we set these men up to their service to be felling these trees for the war effort? Because they were going to need that. They said yes. And I've read in some of the annual reports that he had to have the money to buy the equipment. He didn't have the money to buy the equipment, so he kept delaying. They told him, if you do not have your equipment by a certain time, these young men have to go into the military. And God provided it, the very, very last bit. God provided the money to be able to get the equipment, and he got the equipment and was able to keep all of those intercessory young men here. Wow. That was their task. Like a lot of the girl students, they had to go work in hospitals, other things for the military, but they could stay here because incredible. But that estate is what allowed that to happen. If he hadn't had that, it wouldn't have been possible, see. But he obeyed God. Devil worked his schemes, devil working his schemes, affecting the whole world, affecting them as people in this big world. But God was able to do it. Guess who was put in charge of that for the young men? Toby Bergen. Okay, who was the one that was believing very much, working to get all this equipment put together, etc., like that. They ultimately, during the war years, got commandeered and used by the U.S. military, damaged it quite a bit as far as the estate. They ultimately got some war reparation money as a result of it, which helped get the money The last thing that Samuel Hauser heard from his father was the fact that to believe for the 100,000 pounds to, give to the Israel, to be able to see that money seeded into those nations. And so some of that came from that. Some of that then came from the sale of it. From that standpoint, that money was able to be received. Incredible stories, huh? Amen. Next slide. That's the village that in the book that was untouched by revival. When they took us there. I have no idea where it is. Nobody else knows where it is. Somebody somewhere must know where it is, but we don't know where those people are. So, but we were leaving that village. They drove through. There's not just a few rows of houses. There's not much there. Drove through there, and as we were leaving, I said, "Stop! I want to take a picture." So I took a picture out the back window. I had no idea that flying bird was there, but it looks pretty cool, huh? And but that's the village that was untouched by revival, where Rees Howells did the acts of ministry and life and broke through what other people, famous evangelists, had gone there to preach, and nothing could happen. But God, through intercession and obedience, has broke it open. Next picture.
Sure that's not Cardiff?
No. This one, Mr. Howells did not know exactly, but in the book where Rees Howells was on his way to the manager of a business, and they had been praying for this man, and on his way, and the village is off this way, and but God said you can't go to this man's house until you go up there and knock on that door. And but he didn't know. Samuel Howells did not know exactly which door it was, so I just took a general. But that on the right, one of those doors is where the lady was dying. She had been praying for God to send Rees Howells. She was Catholic, and that's the door he went up to and knocked on, and the little girl came to the door, and what you don't know in the book, or it's not in the book, the father was there putting on his coat to go find Rees Howells. That was what Samuel Howells told me. It's not in the book. The little girl was there. They asked him to come in from that standpoint. But the father was there putting on his coat to go get Rees Howells. Yeah. Next one. That's the picture of the grandparents' house that I cannot find that residence. I haven't found it. I've had people looking for a while since I was here in Blessed Wales. We went out yesterday, couldn't find it. They had not found this house, nor had they found the bridge. And so then Wade and I were to go out Saturday to find the bridge, and I didn't get in till late. And so I made arrangements to go out yesterday morning. But this is the grandparents' home where Uncle Dick was upstairs, the uncle that hadn't really walked but a few steps for 30 years. And it was in that house. Of course, the front windows have been changed. You see the old windows on the side. The front ones would have been more that style. And one person found from some article research that they had done, somebody told him where the grandparents' house was, but it's a picture of a house that's not their house. It's not it at all. It was on Mrs. Howells' side of the family. It belonged to them, not to the other grandparents of Rees Howells. But anyway, that's the place. That's that tall, thin building. Next, please. This is the church to which you walk. That's the church I was looking for yesterday, Ken. I just never saw that church. Because right up that hill is where the house is. I don't know what happened, but there are several things. Of course, it's been 2 decades plus or more, since I saw those things. So there have been some changes, and not the bridge. I mean, I've seen it, but anyway, that's the church that Uncle walked to. It's just 3 miles. I was pretty impressed that a guy who'd been in for 30 years could walk 3 miles. But when I saw how steep it was, the down and up that he had to go through, I was really impressed, because it was really something. Now, what's not in the book, some of you have heard this, but Samuel Howells told me this story, that on the way, they walked by a cousin's house. And the Uncle Dick walked up, knocked on the door. The cousin opened the door, saw the uncle standing there, and passed out. Okay, just passed out and fell to the floor. Well, when they got her awakened, she looked at him and says, "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" He said, "Well, why didn't you believe?" Because they had announced it was going to happen, and he was going to walk to church. Well, she passed it. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Well, why didn't you believe?" Yeah, okay, amen. All right. That is Rees Howells standing on the bridge at the bridge site. It was a wooden bridge, of course, in those days. It has since, you'll see a picture here in a minute, been changed. But anyway, just look at that picture for a while. You can see the man still excited about throwing up his hand. Amen. And it was on that bridge that he made the commitment to never again work for man. God told him that he could take care of him. "Do you think I can take care of you better than anyone else?" And so he gave himself to that. Samuel Howells loved going to this bridge. He loved taking people there. He would go sometimes just himself. He would have him drive up there. This bridge was so important to Samuel Howells because it was there that, and God took a young man. He's not young in that picture. But God took a young man standing on a bridge. He threw up his hand, gave himself totally to him. And he later, this was before the infilling. No, it's not. I got mixed up. This was after God's growing in him, moving in him, etc. But it's before the every creature vision. But he threw up his hand, and what always amazed me, and I would pray it and Samuel Howells and I would talk about it, was the fact that he had no idea that every obedience he had gone through to that point, that when he threw up his hand and made that commitment, he had no idea how much God would use him, how much he would use him in the nations. He didn't realize and know that God would use him to change the history of the earth in the intercessions during World War II. He didn't know, but he yielded himself. He had himself ready and prepared, and God kept taking him into those things. So again, our challenge is we just have to believe the leadings of today, the obediences of today, because we don't know what can happen or what won't happen if we don't yield to those things in God. The world became changed when that young man stood on that bridge. Always awesome. Next slide, please.
Is that the same hat?
Pardon? Oh, his hat. Yeah, you see his hat. Yeah. Yeah. That was the bridge that I knew. And it had boards replaced at times. You see in a couple of different pictures that I have. And I didn't take pictures every time I went, but that was the bridge. And once when I went back after the bridge had been taken out, the stones that were used, that were more on the side you can't see right now, as a foundation for that bridge, I took some of those pretty good sized ones and I brought them home, and just to have as a remembrance. And those stones, they heard that prayer. Those stones, every prayer that's ever been prayed, they're recorded there in those stones. And those stones praise God. They've been praising God a lot. Now, when you go out there, you'll be able to see this. That culvert over here, that's all been changed now. It's much, much nicer. Of course, it was totally different when Rees Howells went through there. They probably didn't even have those tin horns. That's why they had the walk bridge. Yeah. Go ahead. That's the site, isn't it, Ken? We found it, praise God. Yeah, see this stone? This one? I got it.
You stole it.
I what? I what?
I said you stole it.
I guess I stole it, yes. Now that you put it like that, I did. I confessed. All right, next one. I love this one. I love this one. Yeah. Next slide. Different view. I love that one too, but that one, just the significance. We were praying, and somebody snapped the picture. Next picture. That's the group. We were there that day. That's a group, isn't it? very interesting. I mean, that Gaius Lawrence, he's over there on the left,
Yeah.
second row, but he had no idea all that God was going to do with him.
Really?
And the young lady he married is this young lady right here, JC. And that's Christy, isn't it? That's the girl that Terry Woodward married. There's Nathan and Daniel.
And Andy Rudd right beside her.
Yep.
Yep.
She was a diva then
That's
too.
what's AJ.
She's always been.
Okay, next slide, please. Now, I often tell this story. We're going down the road, and Samuel Howells pulls his watch out of his pocket and says to Stan, that's Stan, he was the gardener. He said, Stan, it's 4 o'clock, tea time. I said, oh yeah? Tea time. So we stop, we get out, he pulls out China. And we have tea, as you see right there, we have tea. Amazing. Tea time was very important. What is it, scones? Is that the word? Yeah. Scones. I got it wrong. I do my best work praying in tongues because I don't talk. Yes, go. Next slide, please. You'll see these hillsides tomorrow. No, it's not tomorrow. No, tomorrow. I got my days mixed up. Tomorrow, you'll see those two hillsides. When Mr. and Mrs. Howells, of course, Mr. Howells walked out there all his life, across these hills, through these valleys, across that bridge. But when he and Mrs. Howells would be making big decisions and praying things through, they would come to this spot. One would go to one side, one to the other side. They would go up on the hill. They would sit there. They would commune with God. When you get out there tomorrow, Ken experienced it yesterday. What did you experience yesterday of the...
What was my experience of it?
Yeah, just...
It's an incredible, beautiful place because you're on a high place and you look over to this expansive valley below with all the checkered fields and the spotted sheep and the rock formations that come up in the higher places. It's an incredibly beautiful place. It is truly God's country. I couldn't help but think there was kind of a second Israel. All of those patterns in the sheep and all
Yeah.
that I think in some way spiritually is a second Israel.
Yeah.
So it's a marvelous place, and you go across these cattle grates from the village areas where homes and travel is into this where only sheep reside, and it's a different world, just that quick.
Yeah, just like that.
It's beautiful. And so where the bridge is that he showed earlier, and I suppose this is the same area.
Yeah.
It's all right in there. It's a heaven on earth. If I were to want a place to pray, that would be it.
Yeah.
You know,
It's
he had
amazing.
that- He had that as his.
Yeah, yeah.
foundation.
It's just like it's open. It's just, yeah, it's fantastic. But you'll go there. You guys, I plan for tomorrow, you guys will be able to go and sit on those hills. We may sit there all day. I don't know. Why not? We hope it's not raining if we're sitting there. Then we would know why not. Yeah. Next picture. That's just another shot of that hillside. But I'm walking here, the bridge is down the hill. But they used to let us out up that road 3 miles. I would walk with Mr. Howells. We would go down all the way. We would walk to the bridge. And as the years went on, they'd let us get a little closer. We wouldn't walk, and finally he'd take us to the bridge, go straight to the bridge, and then finally he just couldn't take me anymore from that standpoint. So that was sad. So Richard Mayton took me. And I should have paid more attention to where it is. Next slide. This is Pastor Young and his wife Daphne. This is Kathy and myself when we arrived, first time we ever met them. This is just before going into their apartment that's upstairs, the very highest point in Derwent-Fowler State. They've turned into a very, very nice apartment. It's very, very nice. And it's a place, because they're going to come maybe like 3 times a year is kind of what he's told me. And they just have a very nice place, so they can be very relaxed and have a home while they're here. But very, very special. But a long way up there on all those stairs.